Hello and welcome to Module 3. This one is all about LinkedIn. So everything from optimizing your profile all the way to overcoming common barriers to posting, to idea generation and content creation frameworks. I think this is the longest module and there's a ton of content here. So I've made sure to break it up into quite a few lessons to make it more digestible, but I wanted to provide a dedicated module just to LinkedIn and LinkedIn strategies because one, it's been a significant component of my client acquisition strategy. But two, I also saw quite a bit of interest in LinkedIn strategies in the course waitlist survey. So I wanted to make sure that I dove really deep into these concepts because it seemed like there was a lot of interest. So in this module, I'll be covering lessons like why LinkedIn to provide just a little bit more insight into my approach and what getting clients on LinkedIn actually looks like. I do provide my results on both LinkedIn and in my business, not to brag or show off or anything like that, but just to provide examples. Additionally, I'll also outline steps that you can take to optimize your LinkedIn profile before you ever start posting. And then I'll go into content creation frameworks and how to get started with creating content consistently. So you'll be using a few tabs from the course resource doc in these lessons in this module in general. The first being the content categories and brainstorm tab, then the LinkedIn content tracker and the LinkedIn content repository. I'll let you know when we're using each of these tabs and walk through them with you. But just wanted to give you that heads up that you'll be using the course resource doc in this module. So with all that being said, let's get started with lesson 1, which is called Why LinkedIn. So I wanted to start with providing the why behind this strategy. I feel like it's important to share my reasoning behind things instead of just telling you to do things. So a bit of background and my personal experience prior to January 1st, 2024, I had actually never posted on LinkedIn. I occasionally liked posts. I would connect with people or follow people, but I really just didn't feel the need to comment or create posts of my own. I didn't know what I wanted to say, and it just wasn't a priority of mine when I had a full-time job. But fast forward to 2023, when I was planning my move from full-time employment to starting my own business, it became really obvious through all of the research that I was doing that I would need to get more comfortable with showing up online, whether I wanted to or not. So I knew I could start with my internal network, but I also knew that I would need a mechanism in place to get in front of more potential clients than my immediate network would allow for. So I settled on LinkedIn for a few different reasons. And first of which is that I wanted business. It seems like a pretty straightforward and obvious one. But since it's a platform with a more professional audience, I figured I would have more serious prospects on LinkedIn rather than, for example, Instagram or TikTok. I also prefer writing as my medium. And I know LinkedIn is pushing video a lot more, but there are still plenty of text posts on the platform, and it's still a very text post friendly platform in general. And lastly, posting on LinkedIn seemed less intimidating than posting on other social media platforms. I think probably because there's a lot of text posts on there, there's not the pressure to, be like an influencer or have this aesthetic setup. It just kind of seemed like a place where I could showcase my expertise. I could just make a text post and start to build my profile over time. So why I recommend LinkedIn for freelancers. Biggest reason is that it is a professional networking platform. So the audience here is much more qualified, in my opinion, than other social media platforms. Not to say that you can't acquire clients via YouTube, TikTok, or Instagram, but the demographics of LinkedIn do skew more toward the type of folks who would be looking for PPC services and also have the budget to effectively run campaigns and pay your fee. That's a big one. Additionally, it's really hard to acquire clients if no one knows that you exist. So putting yourself out there on LinkedIn massively improves your chances of acquiring clients. And since LinkedIn caters to that more professional audience, it's a really natural way for you to talk about work, how you work, what you do, and share insights about PPC rather than more lifestyle type social media platforms. It also fits in nicely with my ethos of selling without selling. You're able to show your expertise and demonstrate it instead of trying to convince people that you know what you're doing or having to cold email or DM people. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier too. You don't need a fancy aesthetic setup. You can just start writing text posts in your pajamas if you want. So with all the whys out of the way, let's talk about my approach to LinkedIn because it might be considered a little bit different from the norm. But when I decided that I was going to post on LinkedIn, I told myself that I would provide actual value. I wanted to lead with solutions and I wanted to clearly demonstrate that I was an expert in PPC. This is almost in direct opposition to getting followers, going viral, and getting big on LinkedIn. I would much rather have a small following that's made up of my target audience and wants to hire me and wants to work with me than a ton of people who are commenting and liking all my stuff, but will never do business with me. So I'm really not interested in going viral or amassing a ton of followers quickly. I'm more interested in creating a brand that's built on a reputation of expertise and providing value and taking a slow, consistent, sustainable approach. I know that I'm in this for the long haul, so I'm not in a rush to get a ton of followers or have this huge presence. I'm slowly building my business in a really sustainable way that I feel like I can keep going for a while. With that in mind, let's talk about my results since posting consistently for the past year and a half and how my business actually did. So we'll cover my revenue results so far. This is 2024 on the left chart compared to 2025 to date. And at the time of filming, I'm in May of 2025. So in 2024, my total revenue was $106,590, very specific. And I'm on track to surpass that this year. And so let's talk about the variation in sources of revenue between 2024 and 2025. You'll notice that the internal offline referrals make up 62% of my revenue last year compared to a little bit over 40% this year. And so this is revenue from my internal network, people who know me well and people who knew me before I started posting on LinkedIn who referred business to me that closed. So that's sort of the criteria for that internal offline revenue part of the pie. And while my internal referral revenue became a smaller portion of my total revenue, the cold LinkedIn inbound became a much larger piece of the pie in 2025 compared to almost 12% in 2024. So these are kind of the two big shifts year over year. And so what this tells me is that I'm getting way more interest from people who I've never met before, who are finding my posts on LinkedIn. They're reaching out to me inbound and we have a conversation and I start working with them and get that revenue. The internal LinkedIn referrals is a bit trickier of a bucket. I consider this segment from people who I know and have worked with, but I haven't talked to in a really long time, but they reached out to me on LinkedIn and referred business to me. So that's where you'll see that little tiny, almost 4% piece of the pie in 2024. I actually don't have any revenue that fits under that bucket in 2025 so far. And then I also included unattributed in these pie charts because not every lead and client can be cleanly attributed to a source or a bucket. But I have to imagine that me being a consistent presence positively influenced that revenue in some way. I at least have a digital footprint. I have a place where if somebody mentions my name in conversation, they look me up on LinkedIn. There's a lot of documentation about how I think, my point of view, what I do, and supporting evidence to back up the fact that I'm a PPC expert. And I also clearly state who my PPC services are for, B2B brands, lead gen. I kind of drop these hints along the way so that if there is a conversation where my name is brought up, they can easily, one, self-qualify, but two, they can consume a lot of my content and build trust before we even hop on a meeting or a call. And one additional note that I'd like to make about this slide before moving on to the next is that a good chunk of the revenue from 2024 has carried over into this year. So 2025 isn't fully net new revenue. I've been able to build on quite a few clients that I gained in 2024. I had some churn and I made up for that back in February, but just wanted to make that clear. So a lot of the buckets are one-to-one, or for example, the internal offline, there's still some of that revenue from 2024 over in 2025 that still remains, but some of that has churned and has been replaced by the cold LinkedIn inbound. So that's sort of just additional explanation as to how that pie chart is shifting over time. All right, moving on to my LinkedIn specific results. So at this point, you've seen the revenue breakdown. Now we can see how my LinkedIn stats have stacked up relative to that revenue that we just talked about. So like I mentioned, I started posting in January 2024. And at that point, I had 972 connections. Today, I currently have over 3,200, almost 3,300. I will say that while this is really great progress, it's really great growth, I'm still a really small account. And I wanted to highlight that to exemplify the fact that you don't need a ton of followers or engagement to build a business for yourself and attract clients. So breaking it down, the chart on the left tracks my follower count since January 1st, 2024. Those are the blue lines that are going up and to the right relative to 2025 so far. So those are the red lines over time. And you'll kind of see that there's a steady incline as I'm going through the months last year, and even a steady incline in 2025 so far, even though the growth is a little bit slower this year compared to last year. Now, if we compare that with impressions over time, comparing 2024 and 2025, it varies quite a bit. And I wanted to exemplify this because even if you have a post that really pops off, or in my case, in January of this year, I had a few posts that really blew up relative to my normal. But you'll see that from January to February, I had a modest increase in followers, but it wasn't anything crazy. So again, you can have high highs, low lows, but over time, if you just stay consistent with it, one, you'll see your follower count increase if that's something that matters to you. But two, you'll also open yourself to more opportunities over time. The trick is that if you're not seeing the level of engagement or impressions that you'd like to see, just stay with it. You'll see in 2024, January when I started, I got a nice bump. The algorithm smiled upon me. February, I got absolutely smacked down. March was even worse. And so at this point, I've been doing this for 3 months and I'm like, am I just getting worse at this? Maybe I should stop. But I didn't listen to myself and I kept going. And I made a series of posts in April that really got some traction on LinkedIn and really got a lot of impressions. So it bounced way up. And from that point on, it's been, up and down, but that's to be expected because of the algorithm. So don't let it get you down if you're not experiencing either immediate success or if you've had some success and you're not quite seeing the same level of performance. Just keep going. Over time, it will result in those aggregate up and to the right numbers and those aggregate revenue increases year over year. So it really is a long game. And some additional benefits to posting on LinkedIn is that I have found that people will mention that they see my post on LinkedIn all the time, which is one, really cool, but two, really exemplifies the consistency component. So the fact that I'm consistently showing up in people's feeds, they start to see me more often. They know more about me. They're understanding my point of view. They see the services that I provide. They know what I'm an expert in. So even if you don't think that many people are seeing or engaging with your post, it does have reach. It does have an impact. It does build your brand and it does build your reputation. And you, again, won't be able to cleanly attribute this, but it will likely cause an increase in internal referrals because you're more top of mind for people who already know you. All right. So what does getting clients on LinkedIn actually look like? it looks like a whole lot of DMs. And I thought that folks would be using my website more, but honestly, pretty much every client that I get comes from my LinkedIn direct messages. So I've got a few examples to follow, but one thing that they all have in common is that the outreach is all about help with PPC, or sometimes they specifically say that they need help with Google Ads or LinkedIn ads. This is a nice indicator to let me know that I'm positioning myself and my content correctly because people are directly reaching out and self-qualifying. So let's look at some examples. So you'll see here, I won't read all these out loud. You can read them on your own. But this one message mentioned that they're subscribed to my newsletter and they reached out on my website and wondering if I was taking on new clients. The agency needs some help with their own Google ads. And so they, one, self-referenced where they came from, which is pretty cool for my reporting purposes. But two, they directly mentioned what ad platform they needed help with and in what use case. And then the second one, I've been enjoying your LinkedIn content for a while now. Again, I didn't really see this person interacting or engaging with my posts in any way. So this was kind of surprising, but again, just goes to show that a lot of people will consume your content and may never engage with it, but it doesn't mean that it's not having an impact. So they wanted to learn more about my journey, additionally interested in how you could potentially help. They've been working with another agency on paid, but they're considering moving on from them. And this third message is from somebody who I actually talked to prior to them going out on their own and becoming a PPC freelancer. We met for virtual coffee and I just gave him some tips and tricks on, how to start his business. And so he's doing really well. He was at capacity. He had a friend looking for some paid search support for one of his clients. And so this person introduced me to his friend. We headed off. The opportunity wasn't a good fit for me at the time, but it's just nice to, one, expand my network a little bit more. And it was a really lovely conversation. So out of these three examples, two of them closed, one wasn't a good fit, but still got some benefit out of it. And some additional notes on getting clients from LinkedIn. I will say that I receive a pretty regular flow of DMs, either for agency partnerships, folks that want to meet who are freelancers or want to become freelancers, or potential clients directly asking for my services. I can tell you this 100% did not happen before I started posting. The only messages that I would get were potentially from recruiters. But the fact that I have put myself out there and I keep reinforcing the messaging of my expertise opens up the opportunity, opens up possibilities for me to work with more clients. And my recommendation here is that once you start posting consistently, be sure to check your DMs regularly and make a to-do list to follow up if you open a message. Even if you mark it unread, the LinkedIn interface does a really bad job of making it obvious that you marked something unread. So I just have a recurring to-do list to check my LinkedIn direct messages. And my last point here, and I'll get into this a little bit more when I talk about creating posts, but I also include a call to action at the end of every post, asking for people to reach out if they need help managing PPC or are interested in coaching sessions. So in the upcoming lessons, I'll have some direct examples of that, but I think that's an additional reinforcement of who I am, what I do, that whole service offering positioning that I've kept talking about since module 1. It's a real world example of how I'm reinforcing that messaging to my audience, which I have to imagine helps them self-qualify before they reach out to me. All right, so closing statements on this lesson. You have now seen my results from using LinkedIn, both from a revenue standpoint, business standpoint, and actual LinkedIn metrics over time. My big disclaimer is that your results may vary. I'm just sharing my experience. I'm sharing my results. Yours may vary. This is not a prescriptive, if you do this, you will have the same results. So that is my disclaimer there. But the next lesson is all about overcoming common barriers to being more visible. I had to do a lot of work to overcome these barriers, so I'm hoping it will help you as well. With that in mind, I will see you over there for lesson 2 in module 3.